Welcome to the Not Safe for Work Romance Podcast, where authors take you behind the scenes in our little corner of the romance writing world. I'm Shane Starrett.
And I'm Eris Adderley, and we write the kind of books that embarrass you in front of your relatives. Our episode today, The Dark Side, a discussion about dark romance and why we write it. We'll be talking about what constitutes dark romance in relation to other romance tropes and genres, and why we've chosen to write it as opposed to all the many other types of romance we could be writing. We'll also be discussing how dark romance is often viewed in a negative light versus the positive manner it could and should be seen in. I asked that as a question at the end there because isn't that the debate, right?
Yeah, that is a really good point, because that kind of is the debate, isn't it? There are those that would see what we write as I don't want to say anathema, but for lack of a better term, it's not something that they're interested in, certainly. And there are those people out there that really think that dark romance in particular is something that shouldn't be written. And that's wrong. I mean, that's a form of censorship that I am vehemently opposed to. But we've seen it. I mean,
right. And obviously I'm with you, because I would not be writing this stuff otherwise.
Yeah, well, right. Oh, yeah, I think that kind of goes without saying, right? I mean, we wouldn't be writing this if we didn't really have strong feelings that it is an appropriate genre to write in, and we don't demonize it. We don't kink shame people, even if it's not the particular parts of dark romance that we ourselves write. We're cognizant of that. And I think the readers that read our books are cognizant of it too. I very rarely, in fact, I don't think I've ever seen like a reader who reads one particular type of dark romance try to shame or call out someone who reads something that's on a different part of the spectrum. And I mean, that is one thing. Just dark romance is a spectrum, like most other romance in general. It's not just one thing that defines dark romance.
Right. And we're definitely going to get into, what does that mean to call something a dark romance? Because even that is in debate, and a lot of people disagree as to what that means. I think I'm excited because this episode is full of things that are near to my heart as far as things I get all riled up about. So I'm sure it will be a spicy episode. In terms of me getting all, Yosemite Sam.
Okay. Wasn't expecting that necessarily, but that's good. I think that's great. I think our listeners are going to enjoy that. I'm going to start off by saying, how did I gravitate to dark romance, or why am I even here right now with you having this?
Why are you here, Shane? Get existential with me.
Conversation. I mean, going back to some episodes that we've done in the past where I talked about, I've always written what I would consider to be dark romance, and much of it was very private or just for Cynthia, my wife. I never shared it with anyone else. It was kind of like my dark little secret. So in that regards, I've always written dark, what I consider myself personally dark romance. But you know what? I wasn't reading it.
Weren't reading it. Interesting. Now, I have a question, and please keep going on with that, but I do have a question.
Sure.
The type of things that show up in dark romances, which we'll get onto all that nitty gritty in a bit. Even though you were writing them for private for your own self and for your wife to entertain you guys, but you weren't reading it and maybe just some of as kind of the internet opened up, maybe you just probably weren't even realizing, oh, this stuff is out there all over the place. But did you, even though you weren't reading it, did you find that when you would see that sort of content or topics being brought up elsewhere, maybe in a movie or I don't know what, that you would be like, oh, like you would be interested in it, or that really wasn't occurring to you? No,
it was.
Okay.
I'd be bald-faced lying if I didn't say that, because like the movie 9.5 Weeks,
Which I have never seen, by the way.
You've never seen them?
I'm sure that, like, everybody has seen that movie but me. So I'm out of the loop.
Okay, so to preface this a little bit, I think I've admitted this already, but I don't remember for certain. My wife and I are in the BDSM lifestyle. We have been for a long time.
Okay.
And so 9.5 weeks has always been considered sort of the earliest or an earlier version of the 50 Shades of Grey, where it discusses that dominant submissive dynamic. And it was a lot of times I've heard people talk about it in terms of, 50 Shades of Grey was not the movie that broke that genre into the open, although it was to a certain degree. And they, you can even go back further to the story of O. But yeah, I had seen those movies. I was familiar with them and others like them. But actually reading what I would consider dark romance that has elements of dubious consent, non-consent, I wasn't reading those kinds of books. I was seeing those movies. I Spit on Your Grave, which, oh God, I'm almost loath to bring that up, but that is a very, very, very dark. I don't even want to call it a romance because it's not a romance by any stretch of the imagination, but it has very dark overtones. So a lot
of the things I can remember seeing that I'd be like, oh, and some of the stuff, even I think before I kind of even understood myself as a sexual adult person, you know what I mean? Yes. Like some stuff I would just see and I'd be like, oh, why does this make me feel some kind of way?
Right.
It might be just a scene in a movie that is otherwise some other kind of movie. It's an adventure. It's a spy thriller. It's a this, it's a that. It may not have been a romance. It may have just been one little piece of a larger thing.
Yes, absolutely.
And I kind of wanted to do this at the beginning and I didn't, but I will say now, as we get into the subject of dark romance, anyone let me know, the podcast is the not safe for work romance. So yes, we do swear, as you probably already know. We do talk about some adult topics, but this episode in particular comes with a content warning because we are going to talk about non-consent and we are going to talk about some other dark topics. So fair warning, it's coming up.
Thank you. And that's a really good point. I probably should have led with that.
And we'll get to the idea of content warnings and stuff. We'll come to that.
Yeah.
But I'm just throwing it out there now because whatever content I like to read or write, I'm never trying to force upon anyone else to trap anyone into like, haha, now you're reading something that's giving you PTSD. Like I'm really not trying to do that. So
and that's really important. I mean, yeah, we're going to talk about it later too.
So coming back, but I thought I would throw that in because I had
because here I am
and I forgot.
Right, here I am starting off by talking about how I always wrote dark romance, and people are going to be like, "Oh, what does that mean?" Well, this is what it means.
We'll get to that because sometimes I think there's some, there's a lot of differing opinions about what does that mean.
Right. But
so as I began writing,
as I was writing dark romance and I didn't even realize it. I was just writing the kinds of things that do tickle my pee-pee, for lack of a better term. And it was non-consensual and dubcon.
Sure.
In a lot of it, if not all of it. I mean, I shouldn't say all of it because that's not true, because Sin has pointed out, not everything I did, but a lot of it was. But I wasn't reading it. I was reading history and science fiction and fantasy. And then there was some crossover in fantasy. Some of what C.J. Sherry has written has very dubcon and non-con. The whole Kushil series, I read that. And that, of course, that has a lot of non-consensual and dubious consensual and BDSM related topics in it. So I was reading those things, but they're not still what I would call dark romance. And
there were elements of that in there, but it was not a romance in and of itself.
Right. It wasn't honestly until I kind of stumbled across it, because I cannot honestly remember what I think it actually was something in Kushil, or I was looking for fan fiction that was similar to Kushil or whatever, that I stumbled across the Jennifer Benet.
Sure.
Because she does an AMA, and I found that. And then I started looking at her books. And one of the very first books I found of hers, or not hers, was an anthology she was in that you also happened to be in, which was the When the Dark Winds.
Right. Yes.
So then I actually discovered dark romance as a genre. That was actually when it happened. And of course, it was not that long ago.
So it was like, oh, as you started reading those authors, you're like, wait a minute. And then you would go look those authors up and be like, I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
On this type of content I did not even realize was all out there.
Right. Exactly. And I became involved in readers groups. I actually reached out to you. Then my wife outed me to Jennifer, telling her that I had written a fan fiction and that I had a book, and one thing led to another, and I ended up where I am today. But it was—
You've got your own fan group.
Yeah, I've
got nicknames.
Yeah, exactly. Which we are not bringing up in this episode.
I will not.
We are not bringing that.
That's not the environment.
But yeah, that's how I got into dark romance as an author and as a reader, even though as an author, I was doing it long before I even realized that it was a thing. I honestly, I always associated dark romance with film and movies. And I wasn't really truly aware, except almost in peripheral, that there was an actual body of work out there and a genre that when I did find it was going to speak to me and change my life in a way that I never expected. So it was very interesting. I can't really put it any other way. It was incredibly interesting to me to find it, and then to find how much it changed my life. It, in a sense, I've talked to Cynthia about this, is when she brought me out of my shell as a dom, it was a process, because I had pushed that down for a lot of reasons, hidden that part of me. When I found dark romance, it did the same sort of thing. It sort of took things that I had kept very private and teased them out until I, sort of let them loose in the world and said, okay, I'm going to take this leap of faith that people are going to actually want to hear my stories, and they're going to actually enjoy them, and they're not going to ridicule me and shame me.
Right.
And which is exactly what happened. It has been incredible. And I know I've talked about this before. In fact, I think our very first episode, we touched a lot on this. But that's how I ended up here. And for me, the things that I write about, which are very much contemporary BDSM and dark romance, are the things that appeal to me as a reader. And they're the stories that I gravitate towards. And I love it. I love this genre. I love dark romance. I feel no shame in it. And I chafe at people who try to shame the genre, because I think it's so wrong.
Well, you found your people. So that's
right.
That's a big, that's a big deal.
What about you?
Well, I will kind of segue from that too, just saying that, like, yeah, there is shame involved in this, because, there's, even to some extent, I know a lot of folks out there have shame in just reading regular romance. And when I say regular, I'm going to go the average route and assume there is some steam level. We're not talking about completely clean,
Yeah, everything.
Also, like a mid-level romance has probably got some steam level in it, some sexual content. It doesn't have to be the most graphic thing ever, but so even with like that, there is a lot of people have shame. They don't want to have their family members see them reading that, which I think is also one of the reasons that since ebooks became a thing, that people have, the purchasing of romance novels has soared even more, because you can sit on a bus with your Kindle and people don't know that you're, reading whatever.
Yeah, there's no need to hide it behind a newspaper.
Not that Fabio's on the cover now, but they don't see you reading the book that has the cover with like the bare-chested dude or whatever the heck is going on there. But so that's even like, mainstream romance. And then I think that the dark romance content, there's the added level of like, the other stuff might be, quote, a guilty pleasure, and people might tease you a little bit, but the dark content gets into where there is, it's definitely seen as okay to shame people for enjoying that content. It's like, you're not supposed to like this. So now we're going to question you and tell you that something is wrong with you, which we'll come back to later. But so there's an element of I don't want to say, there's an element of shame surrounding the whole thing. And so as you were saying, like how your wonderful wife kind of coaxed you out of your shell and was kind of like, hey, go talk to this other author that you like. In that you were able to kind of find your people. And a lot of that as where I came into it, me slowly kind of finding my people, finding other people that were interested in this kind of content. This was even before I was writing it, was a big part of the process, because a lot of the times things like that I would be entertained by or interested in or seek out, I would go, I don't really want to tell anyone else that that's why I'm buying this book, because they'll think I'm weird and it'll be like, what's wrong with you or whatever. So it was a thing to do quietly on my own. Like I can think of being, I don't know, junior high age. And at the time I was really super into Anne Rice. I'm not into Anne Rice now. I've just read most of her stuff. Yeah. And, because I was a reader, my mom would just buy me stuff for, birthdays, stuff like that. Oh, here's a book or two. And I remember one of her series that was like the Mayfair Witch series, which is, if you read it, great. If you haven't, it doesn't matter. It's, it's Anne Rice. There's some supernatural stuff going on, and there's some historical things happening. Some of it's modern day, some of it's historical. It's, epic and sensual and all the, it was more story than the Sleeping Beauty stuff that she wrote under a pen name, which I didn't read that stuff until I didn't even know it existed until I was an adult. But at the time, that was probably some of those books were as close to dark romance as I could get. Like, I didn't know that's what I was getting into, but as I started reading it, there were some sexual things happening, and there was a lot of creepy dark. There was some taboo stuff, some stuff that like now I wouldn't even seek out, that I'd be like, no. But, and again, that's just my preference. But at the time, starting to be exposed to stuff like that and wanting to see more of that. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't really want to tell anyone that's why I'm reading this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really want to talk about that part of the book if I'm trying to explain to someone else why this is a good book. Yeah. But it was getting closer, because there definitely were romantic elements to those stories, even if the whole thing was not necessarily a romance. And then as far as writing, so, I mean, I had that stuff kind of floating around, but I didn't really know where to go to seek out any kind of specific content like that. Okay. And I really didn't, as I've said in previous episodes, like how did we start writing? Like I really didn't read romance in general. So it's like I was just not hanging around in the right areas to find this stuff. The closest it started getting was when I began reading things on Literotica regularly, which was probably like 2011 or something. But I was like, okay, I'm going to make a username so I can bookmark some stuff. And, there's some short things that are erotica, but there's a lot of stuff on Literotica it's a full story. There's a romance happening. It just is being serialized on a free site instead of published where you can pay for it. So the two categories I would frequent the most on there were the non-consent reluctance category, BDSM, a good deal. I have my preferences of things I want to read about and things I don't. And there's another category on there that I would sometimes go to, and it was kind of hit and miss. It would depend on the author. And the category was called mind control. which
okay.
actually is a no on Amazon, by the way, which I can come back to later. You're not allowed to do that on Amazon. Like it's considered like rapey and you can't do it.
Right.
Anyway, so those were the categories that I was like heavily reading over other things. And so naturally, I guess when I decided to try my hand at writing something, that was just the kind of stuff I was going to start writing because that's what I like to read. And, you know, you ought to write what you like to read. Else what's the point? I mean, if you're writing for, you know, I get it if you're like writing advertising copy or you're a ghostwriter, you're being paid to do it for someone else. But I'm talking about to write for yourself.
Exactly.
So that's kind of how I ended up in it. But yeah, I would say from a young age, like possibly before I understood a lot of what any of this stuff meant or that there was a taboo, like, you know, the idea of watching any kind of movie or TV show and you're like, you know, the villain is always more interesting. Like you're like, why do I feel interesting when like the girl is tied up? I'm like, what's going on here? But like, you're too young to understand what the hell any of that is. And it's because a lot of people go, oh, well, something happened to you and it made you quote like this. And I'm like, well, then it must have happened when I was like unconscious or something because nothing happened to me is what the answer is. It's like, this is just a thing that came out and I don't know where it came out of, but
right. It was
kind of always there.
Right. It's how you're wired. It's just how you're wired. It's as simple as that. You know, that this whole nurture versus nature argument where it comes to like dark romance or why you like these things is.
And I don't think there has to be any one reason. I think people show up and want to read the content for any number of reasons, which, you know, we can be segueing into, but I don't think that there's one blanket like, oh, we can put a pinpoint on this is why people read and or write this content.
Right. And it doesn't always mean that the person is broken somehow, which is what a lot of people want to pin it on. It's like, well, even within that nature versus nurture argument as well, it's your nature because you were brought up that, or you just have a bad gene in you, or you're just inherently a bad person, or the nurture, which is, oh, you were brought up that way and something in your upbringing has made you be that way. None of that. I'm not disputing it outright, but I think it can't be narrowed down to something, you know, to one way or the other. It's, you know, it's not that simple.
And what I think is very telling about our culture is that we have the need to like dissect this so hard and try to figure out why do people like this to read, to write? Why? Because there's a reason for wanting to get to the why, because usually the question is being asked by people who think something is wrong here and needs to be rectified. So we've got to because it's like, honestly, I could have been fine going my whole life not knowing why and still, you know, having whatever kinks I have to read. It doesn't matter. Like I've had to think about why. And sometimes I think I have answers and other times I go, I don't know if that's really the answer though. Maybe that's just what I can come up with through rationalization. I don't know. So, you know, I don't always have all the answers.
Right. And no one really does, to be perfectly honest, even though, you know, later on, I know we're going to talk about, you know, the body of work out there that supports the idea and the notion that having these desires and being interested in this kind of dark romance is not a bad thing. And I know, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to link some articles in the comments.
Yeah, throw up some links on our Twitter and
right, exactly, because it's important to me. It's very important to me. But all of that being said, I don't think even within the scientific community, no one has come up with, and I don't think anyone ever will come up with the one definitive, well, this is why, because it doesn't exist. And it's not just with dark romance and the desire to read dark romance. It's the human condition in general can't be pinpointed that way. But there are people out there that want to do that because, like you said, if they can pinpoint it to one thing, then they can say, okay, now that we've discovered what makes you wrong, we can now work on changing you to be better. And
sure. And I get a little unnerved when it sometimes seems like that's the kind of driving force behind this discussion. I do not have a problem when the discussion is coming up amongst people who do read and write and are, enjoy the genre when people are just self-analyzing, like not like I'm self-hating or anything, but just I am like what makes me tick. Like I don't mind the navel gazing on the part of people that they're not trying to shame themselves or shame their peers.
Yes,
that doesn't bother me, but it does bother me when it's kind of like this kind of external eye trying to come in and dissect.
Right. When it devolves into comments like you need to seek help.
Yeah.
This person is obviously broken or twisted, or
right. This author needs therapy.
Thank you.
Like, I will say, first of all, literally every human being alive needs therapy. So let's not even act like everybody needs therapy. There's no, if you come in here and be like, I don't need therapy, I'm going to be like, it's highly sus.
Yeah. And I can pull up any number of people in this day and age that are self-professed, straight and narrow people that have and say the awfulest things. And it's like, okay, so you don't need therapy, but because I read a book where it has non-consensual or dubious consensual themes in it, I need therapy? No, I don't think so.
Yeah. People, you need to examine yourself.
Right. Yeah. Don't, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And that is where I really start to chafe and my dander gets up. So, I want to ask you though, because I think we've had this conversation before. Do you consider yourself a dark romance writer, and I'm going to hedge my bets here a little bit, or is it just one genre that you happen to enjoy writing in? And then again, I'm not trying to do what we were just talking about. I'm not trying to pigeonhole you, but I am asking you to, do you consider yourself a dark romance only writer, or is it just, I happen to enjoy that genre and I happen to enjoy writing in it?
If I'm trying to describe my catalog or style or whatever to a new and interested reader, or what do you write? Especially a romance reader, because I think people outside of romance, even just saying dark romance is too specific. They're not going to know what any of that means anyway. I'll just be like, I normally, like, if someone is just a completely random stranger that doesn't know from romance, I say rather sassily, I write trashy romance, which that's a whole nother show, because a lot of people don't like it described that way, but tough beans. That's what I'm doing. Anyway, so if it's another romance reader, I would describe myself as darkish.
Okay.
And so some of my books are definitely dark, which I think that's probably the next thing we'll discuss is like, what does that even mean? Yeah. Some of my books are squarely in the dark camp. Okay. Yeah. Some of the books, it's questionable. It depends on whose critical eye is looking at it, who's asking, because readers even don't agree on what it means to be a dark romance or not. And then a couple of things I have out there aren't even necessarily romances. You know what I mean? Like, they don't meet the criteria. It doesn't follow just one couple, or maybe there's not an obvious HEA. So I would describe myself as a writer of dark-ish romance.
Okay.
And leave it at that. And like, I can, if the person wants more information, I can kind of elaborate on some of the different areas I cover, but a lot of my stuff has dark elements to it, but it's not in every single book necessarily.
Good. I mean, that's almost exactly the same way that I feel about my very much smaller body of work, is that I think it has everything I've written has darkish elements to it. Or I guess I should say, what I perceive as readers thinking would be darkish elements, even though I don't think every story that I've written falls under what I perceive as the dark romance category. Because I don't believe a book like Ferris, which is, to my mind, strictly a BDSM story. Sure. It's not dark.
And see, that's as we say, that'll be a good segue to the next topic. Is like, there's a lot of people floating around that they literally consider BDSM to mean dark.
Dark, yes.
And to me, that does not mean that. So it just shows that it's not just a black and white definition of what this is. But like a book like Jaded, there are elements in it that are really messed up and dark, and you're like, oh my God. But at the same time, I don't know if I would count it as a dark romance, because for me, that means a specific thing about what happens in the, sex scenes in the book. And that's not that book.
Right.
So
and it's funny.
Very intense.
Yeah, it's intense, and there's subject matter in the book that I definitely consider dark.
Absolutely.
But here again, it doesn't meet the same criteria for other people. And it's funny because I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I embrace that because that's what I think is a good, healthy way to approach what I write and what we write, is that it doesn't have to meet everyone's criteria. It doesn't have to be pinpointed to a specific thing. It's what that particular reader decides the book is.
Yeah, I'm just going to write what I'm going to write, and other people can figure out how to like hash up all the, particulars of the subgenre and all that stuff. Like, I mean, I can take a vague stab. Obviously, I'm going to have to, because as a self-publishing person, I'm going to have to pick categories and keyword things and try to advertise my stuff. So I'm going to have to do my best, but I'm going to leave it to other people to decide what they want to call it.
And that's where I've basically come to, is that I'm just going to let the reader themselves decide what it is. If it triggers them and it falls into that, what they consider dark romance, great. I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted to read, but I wrote it. That's the story I'm presenting to you. If Eris, which is to me almost as light a story as I've written, you still consider it dark because it has BDSM in it, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. But that's the story I wrote. And there you are. I know we're going to talk about trigger warnings later, but because I'm sure we have very specific feelings on that. But the story is my story that I wrote, and I'm presenting it to you as the author, to a reader. You don't have to like it. You don't have to think that you can, or rather you can think it's a dark story, or you can think it's not a dark story. That's your decision. I can't change that, nor do I want to.
Yeah, I feel like it's not the best use of my time to get down into the weeds and try to debate what is and is not dark.
And get into this entire thing where we almost need like a Dewey Decimal System, the equivalent of a Dewey Decimal System for what constitutes dark romance. Well, let's go to the catalog and does it have this, and this in subsection 3, paragraph 22? I mean, good Lord.
The archivist in me is like, well, why don't we? Like, I'm like, stop it. You need to stop it right now because you got books to write. You don't have time to invent the dark decimal system for romance.
The dark decimal system. I love it.
That's what it's going to be.
That's what I love, the concept of the dark decimal system, but dear God, I do not want it.
It sounds like some weird, like sci-fi thriller, quite frankly.
Well, and then it gets into the, almost like we have in the BDSM community, the one true way. Well, then who gets to decide and is there a Bible of the one true way? Does the dark decimal system have a catalog or an encyclopedic system for us to decide how to categorize it? No, we don't need that. I mean, and then I'm
exhausted already.
Right, exactly. And then where does it stop? Do we have to start doing that for Western romances and every other trope?
What counts as this? What counts as that? Yeah. Well, I agree with you, but I will say, to be fair, dark romance is one of the kind of few subcategories that a lot of people are looking for a warning.
Okay.
Like, most people are probably not like, why didn't you warn me this was a Western? I'm having PTSD from the time I got in a fist fight with a cowboy. I don't know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, our category is a little bit special because of that, I think. But
it is. And we're going to talk about this further, but I still chafe a little bit at
Sure.
So again, talking about common traits and themes in dark romance, because that's going to help us as we talk about the need for triggers and things like that. In your mind, what are some common themes? What, for you as an author, and picking a dark book that you've written, what are the common traits or themes in dark romance that you think made that particular book a dark romance book?
Okay, well, this is a good question. And I will say, for something to be a dark romance, you've got to have two halves of this equation. You've got to have dark and you've got to have romance. because there's a lot of dark books out there, again, that are not romances.
Sure.
There's no HEA.
Or yeah.
There's no HEA. That's usually the qualifier. You know what I mean?
Or,
it might
or
be a
HFN.
love story, or somebody might die. It doesn't end on a hopeful note, or even a note of like the two people we wanted to get together are getting together, even if their situation is fucked up.
Right.
Like that needs to happen, or it doesn't get to count as a romance. So there's that.
Yeah.
Now that part is usually less in debate, but the dark part is what's in debate. Now for me, at this point, being exposed to all the types of books and reader groups and all this stuff that I am, to me, dark typically means that there are going to be some, I don't want to use the word taboo because that often means other things, that there are going to be some kind of like largely problematic elements to the relationship of the two main characters. Now, the big one that is the big lurking beast is consent. Is this book got rape in it? Is it got dubious consent in it? That to me, that like it's dark. We're at dark romance now. If that happens, but the plot of the book is for the two people to end up sorting their shit out and being together, that's dark.
In some fashion or another.
There's other stuff that I personally would also consider dark, and then it gets a little vague as to like how much of this do I need for me to call it dark. But maybe there's not a consent issue in terms of sex, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that is like, obviously the hero is acting like a bad guy. And not just like, oh, I'm a bad boy, look at me and my motorcycle. I'm talking about like, there's been an abduction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's, there's some kind of violence that happens, whether it's not sexual, but the heroine is forced to do something else. Like, I don't know what, like, I don't mean like sexual. I just mean like anything like, she's being extorted or blackmailed or something.
Yeah.
Or that kind of stuff. Like if those elements are fairly pervasive and like central to the plot, in my head, I'm like, that's a dark book. If it's only like one little thing that happens, or it's not the whole entire book, or it's peripheral, like the stuff happens from a villain and it's only like one or two scenes. Like me personally, I'm like, is it that dark? Like it might have some intense moments, but kind of everything has some intense moments to it. I know I know other people have a lot of different qualifiers as to what's dark. Like if there's drug abuse in it, does that make the whole book dark? I'm probably forgetting a lot of stuff, and maybe you can bring up like what other things have you heard, or what things do you think makes something dark?
Well, you talked a little bit about taboo. I think when you bring anything that society, for, just as a qualifier, considers taboo,
sure,
then the story goes from being romance to dark romance, and taboo, of course, does cover a huge list of things. It could be the whole taboo of stepbrother, stepsister, brother, sister, bully romance, where
sure. I've read a bully romance.
Yeah, where it trends into that almost dubcon, like is he or she being forced into it because they're
it's like, is this abuse how this person treated them or is treating them now?
Right. Abusiveness in the romance. Manipulation. You brought up something, mind control as a
and I think for me, I feel like mind control is like just a subset of non-consent to some extent.
Well, it is, but a lot of these things, depending upon who you're talking to, could be considered subsets of non-consent.
Sure. Well, look at here's a term that I had to learn after coming into this genre. Does the term sex pollen mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will explain it for people listening, because maybe not everybody knows what that is.
Yeah.
I didn't know, and I've made it to like probably 37, 38 years old. This would be a trope where a character cannot sexually resist another character because of something that is beyond their control, and it is typically outside of the character. It could be something like, it's not a situation like someone's been roofied, because that's a different thing. I'm talking about like it's a shifter book, and the shifter that they're kind of interested in or getting entangled with has got some crazy pheromones, and
Right.
this character is some other special kind of person that their chemistry reacts to the pheromones and they go crazy and they just have to bang. It doesn't matter if they really want to or not. It's like they kind of lose their mind and like have to fuck this person.
Right. And
it could be, again, it could be pheromones. It could be, I mean, the description is sex pollen, like it could be something in the air. There's all kinds of things that fall under that category. It could be, I don't know, like a weird reaction to a medication.
Yeah, there's any number of things it can be. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the person that's giving off the pheromone or has control of the sex pollen is doing it manipulative.
Yeah, intentionally. Some people even think that like fated mates counts as sex pollen because you can't resist the pull of this person.
Right.
In a sexual way because you're fated to be with them.
Right. And then that immediately makes it or constitutes it in falling into the overarching category of dark romance because
perhaps the consent is dubious.
Exactly.
Like would they go be with this person if they weren't like the fated mate of them? And I've seen people looking for that trope. I want a book about fated mates where they hate each other at the beginning.
Oh yeah. And
which is very popular.
Right. And then even if it doesn't, if the one mate never actually comes around, so to speak, fully, if there's still that tension there, that that's people are looking for that too, or some people are only looking for it when the one person fully comes around. So there again, we get to all of these different levels.
It starts to get very it starts getting broken down to a very micro level of what is what. And you mentioned taboo. And here's the thing that I find interesting. And again, because I kind of got my start on literotica, there's a category on there called incest/taboo.
Yep.
Now I'm going to say that 90% of that category is probably incest. And, real talk, confession time, that is not my kink. I have read some incest. I have read some stuff by authors that I like very much. And I read that because I like their voice and they're my friends, but it's not a thing I'm hunting out. But the thing is that ideally taboo is also supposed to describe other taboo relationships, like the college student and the professor. That's not allowed.
Age.
A priest who is supposed to be celibate and person, but that's supposed to be taboo. And a lot of times it gets left out of there. And to me, I find that interesting because me personally, I don't necessarily consider that stuff dark, whereas a lot of people do. I don't know that I consider it dark. I feel like taboo and dark is for me two different things. Okay, there could be some overlap, but I feel like a lot of it's for me. But that's the point: is that nobody's agreeing on this shit.
Right, and thank you, because see, I would disagree to a certain.
Taboo for me means weird, but I don't know. For me, I don't know that weird necessarily means dark.
Right.
But again, here we go.
Here we go. Even between two people like you and I that agree on so many things, even we can't sometimes come to agreement.
Right. And a lot of it's informed by what, how did we get where we are now? What material were we exposed to? What am I looking for? What other curators of language were kind of guiding our learning experience, if that makes any sense? What sources were we looking to as an authority to say what's what? And
to define how we see these things. And that's what it ultimately, it's how we see them and how we've defined them. And so then we place our own specific definition and categories on those things. It doesn't mean that either one of us is right or wrong. And that's an important thing is that none of this is about what is right or wrong. It's just how we see things and it of course then becomes how we write things and then how readers perceive them. It's in this taboo category and some of the categories that we've just been discussing. A lot of it, in my estimation, also relates to whether you can look at it as being fantastical or too realistic. And I say this because one of the things that in my own personal life, in my writing, that my reader back in the day, which was a single person, didn't like about some of the things that I wrote was because they couldn't disassociate themselves from the story because to them it was too realistic.
Yeah,
And
I hear that a lot, and that makes, it makes sense to me.
And sometimes that becomes a criteria for how a person sees a romance being just a romance with, maybe like you use the term intense scenes, or the romance being a dark romance because the scenes themselves, there's no verisimilitude. They're too realistic. So for that person, that's what pushes it into dark romance. And this then, all becomes part of that whole conversation when you start delving into the specifically non-con is that
that's all. That seems to be the big, the big one that's a problem for everybody. I mean, I'm honestly sure probably other things are problems for people too, but that seems to be like the big one.
Well, yeah, it is one of the big ones. Now, there again, for some people, it is the taboo. Oh my God, you can't possibly, that's too dark if you write about incest. Okay. Right. That's too much. That's the line. It's dark. But yet if you talk about that same person, you can say, well, what about this story that has a non-con scene in it? Oh, no. That's dark, but it's not really that bad, especially if the two people eventually come together. And it's just, there's so many things. It's so hard to draw.
It's very individual.
Straight lines when we start talking about this subject, because it is very individualistic. And yet people don't seem to want to embrace that a lot of times when we talk about, well, I shouldn't just say readers, but because it's with authors too. It's humans don't want to give on this subject. It's for a lot of them, it's very definitive and they want to draw straight lines and they want to say, if you deviate from point A to point B, then you are writing dark
right. Well, and I think, and that on a level, even though it's inconvenient and messy, it makes sense because we are, as human, as like the animals that we are wired to compartmentalize things and make generalizations and distinctions, because that is like our lizard brain trying to survive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, then when we get out of lizard brain into all this like intellectual debate over what is what, then it's not so easy.
No, it's not. And it's why we've had things in the past in our history of things like book burning, book suppression, book burning, even when it wasn't romance based. Because
where my dad lives in the US in my lifetime, they had Harry Potter book burnings.
Yeah. Okay. That's a fantastic example.
I'm like Harry Potter now. I saw the movies and I didn't get around to reading the books until honestly 2 or 3 years ago. So I was late, obviously, to that whole train, but I read them and they were really fun. And I'm like, really? We're burning these books? It's so silly. To me, it's silly. I am not feeling like my religion and ideology about how the universe works is being attacked. So,
but yet
I'm not trying to dismiss book burnings. I think that's bad, period. But I'm just saying I wasn't the one feeling attacked. So.
Right. Exactly. You weren't, but yet somebody out there was. Enough people out there that they organized a book burning.
Somebody was terrified that their way that they think the world works was going to be disrupted. And, so we have crazy fear reactions to stuff.
Right. And the same thing with rock and roll music and violent horror movies and violent video games. Where this all comes back to dark romance is there are always people out there that are going to take some form of entertainment or communication, and they're going to say, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. And they're going to come up with a rationale or a reason why, and they're going to say, and so we have to correct this. Dark romance suffers from that. There are people out there that will tell you, if you've written a book that has a rape scene in it, or where the woman has been kidnapped or the guy has been kidnapped and they're being tortured or abused sexually. It is wrong. It shouldn't be there. Again, you need that author needs to go into therapy. And
you
yet,
ever notice nobody is saying this about horror and thriller and suspense and like full-on fantasy that includes it? You ever notice it's only romance that people are bitching about this, though? Like, well, I mean, I'm getting a little snarky here, but like, you don't see anyone coming for George R.R. Martin. You don't see anyone coming for, I remember in The Stand by Stephen King, there is a scene where somebody sodomizes somebody else with the barrel of a gun.
Yeah, okay.
It was not consensual. Ain't nobody coming for Stephen King and going, oh, you're naughty, you need therapy. I mean, I'm sure probably someone has told Stephen King he needs therapy, but those are just those people with their.
Because I would argue that's not true, and I have one example of that is when I read the very first time I read Different Seasons, which is his anthology book.
Sure, I know of it. I have not read that specific one.
Yeah, there's I think every one of the stories in that, with the exception of one, and I could be wrong, has been made into a movie at some point. At any rate, there's a story in there that he wrote, and it concerns a young boy who discovers that there's a Nazi living in his neighborhood. And he basically falls in with this guy and becomes corrupted, because he's impressionable. And there's a scene in that where the young boy fantasizes about raping a girl that he knows at his school. And he does, at the time, I remember reading this book, because again, I wasn't reading quote unquote dark romance. I read this scene and I was aroused by it. I thought it was incredible. And I remember hearing people talk about that scene in particular and go, how could he write this? It's the worst thing. And he's, they were basically, there were people that were saying books shouldn't be allowed in libraries. It shouldn't be taught because of that scene. Same sort of thing.
Well, that's a good example.
Yeah.
I made, like, perhaps I'm just, sheltered in that feeling, like a lot of it comes at romance and not as much other genres.
But it does.
I'm, sheltered.
It does come more. I agree with you that it comes more at romance, but it's funny because it's the sex. And another example of this is Donald.
Because the purpose of romance is for enjoyment. We're supposed to be liking this and being aroused by it if it's got sex in it. And so suddenly, if it's something we're supposed to like, and then it's a thing that we're not supposed to like, now something is wrong.
Right. And Stephen King has actually written several articles about, because he had the same problem in Christine. He talks about this. There's a scene at the very end of Christine where the young man and the woman, and in the book, it's clearly that they're teenagers.
Sure.
And they think they're probably going to get killed by Christine.
Right. Yeah, and they're in high school, because I remember that whole.
Right. Plot. And they have sex. It's like, okay, I think we're going to die, so at least I want to. And he got raked over the coals over that. And he talks about this whole concept of, oh my God, I wrote this book where this guy he's a horrible human being, and his soul is possessed in the car, and the car is murdering people and killing.
Right, and that's what we're focused on.
And that's what we're focused on, is that two high school kids have sex, as if that's never happened in the history of the world.
Right. Let's ask how old a lot of people's grandmas and great grandmas were when they had their first kid. Like, let's not.
Right. But let's ignore that, or let's focus on that and ignore all the horror. And Donald Westlake wrote a book called Kahawa. Same sort of thing. It's based upon Idi Amin. It happens during the time period in Uganda during Idi Amin. And he talks about, all of this horrific things that were going on at that time. But in the book, because he says this is one of the only books I ever wrote where there's really like a romance thread going through the book. He says, so I wrote it, I released the book, and by our standards, the sex scenes in it are so tame, and yet like
people were losing their mind.
They lost their shit. They lost their fucking shit because it had sex scenes in it. And they were like, we've always loved your books. Your books have been so funny and they're so exciting. And you wrote this. How did you possibly? And he, in the foreword to the second edition of the book, he was like flabbergasted. He's like, I wrote a book about one of the most horrific human events in history.
And that's what you're caught up on. And
people didn't have a fucking problem with the mass murders. And I wish I could.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. That's very tied into the morality of our culture.
Yes,
that violence and death and war is all great, but sex and pleasure is bad. And again, I don't want to get off on a whole religious tangent, but that's definitely tied into cultural, like religion seeping into the culture and that kind of morality seeping into the culture. That's where that comes from. That we don't just like pop out of the womb in a vacuum and think that this stuff is bad. Well, for probably not thinking about a whole lot at that age, but you know what I'm saying? Like you have to be conditioned to be making those value judgments, violence good, sex bad. That is nurture.
That's right. That is
not part of nature.
That's part of that nurture argument. It all boils down to this. So it is the sex a lot of times and the style of the sex, for lack of a better term, or that it drives these very intense arguments and emotional responses to what we write. So I write a scene in Jaded where the girl is captured, kidnapped, and her kidnapper doesn't want her to be, abused, but she's left with a guy and he abuses her. That is what people go, there's some elements of darkness there. Like, but to me, I'm like, does that make it a dark romance? Like and again, this gets into personal criteria. For me, no, because for me, I feel like for it to be a dark romance, that the darkness has to be part of the relationship between the main two characters who are trying to get together. Right.
Whereas for me, I'm like, this is one part of the book and it's a villain. So like, I just count that as villains acting villainous.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a bad person doing a bad thing. It's not, this. It doesn't make the book necessarily a dark romance, or if it is, it's a minor part of it, and it's not.
And it's not in debate. It's like, we know this is a bad guy doing a bad thing. There's no because that's, I think, why people read a lot of this is because now there is a question. There's confusion. We go, I know that I shouldn't see the heroine get treated this way, but why do I enjoy this hero that is acting in these problematic ways?
And if you do enjoy that, because I'm in that camp, that does not make you an inherently bad person. And
I think there's a lot of not distinguishing fantasy from reality.
Exactly.
Like it's the whole, like as you brought it before, I think there's a lot of folks out there that think that because someone has consumed media that they will absorb that thing
and become
that thing. So it's like, because I listened to Guns N' Roses growing up, theoretically I should be a heroin addict.
Exactly.
Newsflash, I've never been drunk. I've never been high. You know what I mean? Like I read a bunch of Stephen King books and other type of horror type books. I've never murdered anyone. I've played video games where people get murdered gratuitously. Also never done that. It's like, but amazingly.
But there is this subset of people out there that believe that is absolutely true. And that's what we butt heads and what we come up against as dark romance authors is those people that aren't able to separate those things. They think exactly what you just said. If you listen to Guns N' Roses, you're a heroin addict. If you
or going to want to because it's glorifying it.
Right. Oh yeah. There's a great term that gets thrown out.
Yeah, it's perpetuating rape culture. It's glorifying.
It's exactly
stuff. First of all, as though rapists are reading romance as a guidebook, like that's where they're going.
Yeah, right, exactly. Oh, okay, so that's where they got these ideas, and they didn't know how to do these things until they read the book and like, oh, well, now I understand what I need to do. Let me go out and do it.
Right, and my big sticking point on all of this, because there's a lot of debate, and my big sticking point on the whole fantasy versus reality thing is here is the difference, because like let's. Probably there are people who could listen to this and legit make accusations or debate. So I will be very clear. I am not pro-rape in real life or any kind of non-consent anything. Consent is good, okay? Like, we're not talking about real life right now.
Exactly.
But here is the difference between those two things. Agency. In real life, that's why it's a problem, because the person who was abused or assaulted or raped, they were not allowed agency in that situation. You know what I mean? This situation was foisted upon them or forced upon them, or, however it happened. Reading a book I went and chose to read that book. And even if I chose to read a book and there wasn't really a content warning, which we can get into in a second, and I start reading some stuff and I'm like, I did not sign up for all of this. Guess what? I have the agency to close that book and it's over.
Exactly.
It's over right now. Whereas the real life problem, you don't have the ability to get out of the situation.
There's no
why it's a problem.
Right. There's no safe word in a real life non-consensual.
Yeah, someone else can take your willpower away and decide for you. When you are reading a thing, you decide I decide what to
reading,
to consume.
Writing, listening, in all of those, we have agency. I can turn the radio off, or I can turn my iPod off. I can close the book. I can shut my Kindle off. And I've exercised my agency now to not participate or not read that or consume that entertainment. In real life, when you go from the fantasy to the reality, of course, you don't have that agency. It's going to happen to you. It's being forced upon you.
Right.
So this is that argument like that we're talking about that goes beyond just romance to these other genres and other mediums too. Film, video games,
right,
music. It's when people try to shove their ideas down our throats that you can't do these things because of X, Y, and Z, that I think as authors, we start our hackles, or creators of content, our hackles start to go up, because that's not true.
The shaming of people who seek the content out, like something is wrong with you. You need to get yourself looked at, like making people doubt themselves. Like, as we brought up this, like we touched on it at the beginning, but people arrive at choosing to read this content for many reasons. Some people are survivors of rape or abuse, and for them, sometimes they like this content because they get to like work through some emotional shit in a way that they are in control of now.
Thank you. And that's
other people, maybe they aren't survivors of that, but for whatever reason, the idea of, a scenario where they are powerless, power exchange type of stuff or whatever, does it for them. And, that's not something you can really do in real life. I mean, maybe you have a partner, you might be able to set up some kind of play like that, but it's so what they want to go read that. Like, why?
Even in those situations, though, where you have a partner in real life that you can, it's still fantasy. Your partner in real life is not doing that.
Yeah, you're still choosing that.
You're choosing
activity.
And if it's done in a healthy fashion, you have an escape route, so to speak.
Sure.
Because you can simply use a safe word or say, no, I'm not, I want this to stop. Whereas in the reality of the situation, that's, like you said, that agency is completely taken away from you. And yeah.
But yeah, just the assumption that it's like, if I write X, that automatically means I'm saying it's okay in real life. To me, I find silly. And I know we've said this before, but I'll go back and I've written, even though I write romance, I write a lot of intense kind of dramatic stuff. So I've written murder scenes that are graphic and gory. Like, I've written other stuff that's messed up, and I think it's pretty, I don't condone murdering people in real life. Okay. I don't condone any of this horrible stuff. It's fiction. It's
fiction. It's fantasy. It's entertainment. It's meant to provide our readers who enjoy the same things that we do, so to speak, because that's why we're writing this. We're not just doing it because, it got handed to us and say, well, this is all you can write as an author. We're doing it because we love what we write. And we want, and we found readers who enjoy the same thing.
It's like,
Listen,
why do people go to haunted houses at Halloween
exactly.
and get on roller coasters? I like, people like being scared. Not everybody does, but a lot of people like that, like adrenaline and the angst and all that stuff. Some people like that. And for some people, reading dark content is a reading version of that sort of thrill to be sought.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that does not like horror movies. I don't. I had a girl that I roomed with when I was in college who loved horror. It was like her favorite thing, her favorite movie genre. And she tried to convince me. She did this whole thing where we spent like one Saturday when she showed me what was supposed to be the penultimate horror movies. And it was the most gut-wrenching, long day I have ever spent.
What was the movie? Or
there was one called Solo, 120 Days of Sodom. The Hills Have Eyes. I remember that one.
I vaguely remember, I remember when The Hills Have Eyes came out.
Oh,
I did not see it.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I can't remember.
I've seen a few horror. It's not a genre I gravitate towards, and a lot of it just for me is like.
It isn't, especially in film.
I just don't care. I don't care about slasher gore stuff. At a certain point, it's just like, how much weird ways can we cut up a person?
Exactly.
And I know that sounds gross, but I get bored. I know it's all special effects. I don't care.
I just had no investment, no agency in it. I just wanted it over with. And she was my friend, so I was trying to.
You're trying to be okay, I'm going to see if I can find a way to be into this.
And then to make, this is, again, I know that there's probably people out there that read our stuff that have the same reaction. I hate it. I don't like it. And
sure.
then she wanted to talk about it, and she wanted to engage me. And did you? And I was like,
I'll talk about it, but people just probably won't like the fact that I'm going to be
exactly.
It's boring to me. I don't get anything out of it.
Right.
I have to be convinced to watch horror movies for that reason. And Nathan, one that I will say I enjoyed because it went a completely bananas direction. Have you ever seen Cabin in the Woods?
No,
So I had to be convinced to watch this because I'm like, this just sounds like another stupid thing. I'm going to promise you right now, my friend, this is the weirdest fucking shit. You think it's going to be a normal horror movie, and it just takes a completely weird left turn. It's so crazy. Just, you have to watch it. And I'm telling you this as a person on your same page who does not give a shit about horror movies.
Is that the one though? It's like the two redneck guys.
I don't remember.
No.
So long. I remember more about the plot twist than the actual way it opens up.
Okay.
But it's one of those movies that you're just like, okay, I think I know what this is. And all of a sudden you're like, what the fuck is going on?
Right.
That one is worth it. But I had to be convinced. It was out for years and years before I was willing to watch it. Because I'm like, it's just another stupid fucking thing. My husband still hasn't convinced me to watch Saw. And he's telling me for sure it's got some crazy twist. And I'm like, yeah, but do I want to sit there through all the screaming and the shit to get to it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're way off topic, but
no. I mean, we're off topic a little bit, but it is still relevant to what we're talking about because.
But I'm not going to tell anyone they're immoral for wanting to watch that.
And I didn't with her. I was like, we had a conversation. We had conversations about it. In fact, we had conversations that went on long after that Saturday, but we never agreed that I could never come to an agreement with her that I liked them. I said, I understand. I get it. You're explaining your position very well. It just isn't my position. And they don't.
It just doesn't hit you in that way. Whatever that person is getting out of it, you're not getting out of it.
Because she even admitted there were times because it gave her a almost sexual thrill to be watching horror movies, that the elevated heart rate
sure.
And I was like, I get it. I totally do. But these aren't doing it.
It's not having that effect on you.
It doesn't have that effect on me. I can't overcome just the violence. And it's not that I'm opposed to violent movies because Lord knows I've watched some, but it didn't work.
But see, that's the thing. It's interesting because I watch and enjoy violent content regularly. There's a lot of things I like that are very graphically, grossly violent. And I don't know what some of it I think because it'll be violence in the context of another genre, because for me, one of the reasons also I don't bother with horror is I feel like it takes itself very seriously. And as you know me, I don't invite me to a funeral. I can't fucking be serious for 10 minutes. So I'm like, this movie is just taking itself so seriously. But like, I would watch it to like a TV show I really liked that is over now. But the TV show they made out of the graphic novel series Preacher. I don't know if you ever watched it.
Oh, yes, I watched that.
That is extremely violent and graphic and disgusting. But the whole point of it is not the violence. Like that's just kind of ancillary to the plot.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Stuff
like that. But I like stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that's disgusting. Oh, they cut that guy's head off or whatever.
Yeah. When we were visiting with a friend of ours, we watched the entirety of the Boys. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I've seen all those.
That has some incredibly violent.
There's some stuff you're like, oh shit, what did they just do? Did that just happen? Like, oh my God.
But yet I loved that.
And I think it's context. It's like I'm showing up for superhero stuff and social commentary, and that there's violence does not bother me. I'm okay with it.
Exactly.
But horror movies are like, this should scare you. And instead of getting scared, I get like, come on, you're trying really hard.
Right. So this is a good point, though, to talk about some of the things about dark romance.
Yes.
That
back on topic.
Yeah. Well, where there's this argument here. Okay. So like if you go to a horror movie, it's typically advertised and the posters and whatever tells you you're going to a horror movie.
Right.
So now we're talking about dark romance and how we tell potential readers you're going to read a dark romance story. Yes. And this is what we have termed in our little world as triggers.
Sure. Well, I mean, that term is used elsewhere, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I realize, but I'm speaking specifically.
The trigger warning for the content of the book.
So let's talk about that for a second, because there are two sides to this argument. And the one.
This is the section of the show for which I have notes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I'm not there yet,
but that's the great debate, right? Is do we put trigger warnings on our books, on our advertising, or when we put them up on Amazon to let people know, hey, this book has dark themes in it or dark content, and yet at what, again, now when we start talking about this, we also then have to open up that Pandora's box of, okay, but what triggers, what constitutes dark romance, and how do we, do we put those triggers up? Because we're unfortunately in a position with, especially if you're an independent author and you're going through the, 900-pound gorilla in the room of Amazon, if you put a trigger warning that is too detailed, that goes beyond just putting dark romance, you potentially are going to put yourself in a position to be thrown in the dungeon, which is that part of Amazon where you won't be able
to go to die.
Or books. Well,
not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It's very you better really know what you're doing to market that thing. Is all I'm saying.
And the reason why people try to avoid being thrown in the dungeon is because it has to do with search parameters.
Your book won't come up in a search. Like someone has to click on the exact URL, which means they probably already need to know you as an author or see someone else who liked your book that has shared that link somewhere.
Right.
Specifically that link. And they can't even search. If my book is in the erotica dungeon, they can't even search Eris Adderley and see all my books. That book won't be there. Exactly. All my other books will be, not that one.
And I think it's important just to take a moment to make sure that readers and people who might be listening to this that may not be aware, but that's how it works, folks.
Go ahead.
If you get thrown in the erotic dungeon, it means that potential readers out there who go to Amazon and might be searching for books of your style or your tropes won't find it. It will not come up on an Amazon search.
Yeah, and this is different, by the way, than people that are readers who don't have to upload books and deal with all this bull crap. When you go to publish a book, and I only have my books on Amazon, but I'm sure there are similar things that happen on other platforms. You have to choose what categories for the website, the platform, to put that book in.
Right.
Is it sci-fi? Is it history? Is it self-help? Whatever. Okay, so one of the categories you can pick is erotica, and it has many subgenres as erotica does.
Mm-hmm.
The erotica dungeon, or just the dungeon, is a different thing. It's two different things. So I have a book that's on Amazon, for example, right now, that I did intentionally select erotica as Flame to Smoke is in erotica, because it's just short and it's just sex. That's the only point of that book. And that's fine, and that's where it is. And with it being in erotica, I 100% for sure cannot run Amazon ads for it.
Yep.
I probably can't run a Facebook ad for it, because Facebook will comb the link and see the word erotica and be like, no.
Yep.
So already just the regular erotica category is like, unless you're a prolific erotica author, a lot of people try to keep their books out of there. But the erotica dungeon is not something you pick for yourself. It is something that Amazon decides your book goes in if many ifs. Like, they don't like your book cover. They think it shows like half a butt cheek or something. They think that a word in your blurb is objectionable, and that it means it goes in the X-rated dungeon. It's so opaque, there's no telling really what goes on, but maybe they scan some of your content and decides that that's where they're going to put it. Maybe a reader read it and reported it because they had their panties in a bunch, and Amazon is like, nope, in you go. And once you get in there, I won't get into it, but it's a whole thing to get out, if you can get out. When your book goes in there, it is now like almost impossible for people to find. They have to click on the URL to that book. Like, I have to post the URL like on my social media saying, hey, go buy my book, and they have to click right on it.
Right.
Or they can't find it. Like, there's no going to search for Eris Adderley, or even search the title of the book, even if you know the title. Nope,
right.
It's not going to come up.
Which makes it incredibly difficult to bring in new readers, because it becomes this whole, they have to find you out through external sources, whether it be another reader that they know, or they just happen to somehow magically stumble across your Facebook page. It just makes it so difficult for that book to then to reach an audience. Right. Aside from people that readers that you already know.
Who are looking for your stuff and following you on social media. So that's where all the tap dancing comes in.
Yes.
Is because authors are very afraid of getting smacked by the Amazon censor and getting stuck into either erotica, because Amazon will also just put you in the erotica category whether you ask for it or not, or worse, the erotica dungeon. The blacklist, red flag, whatever the hell they call it. There's a lot of different names, but it's all the same thing. So we're paranoid that things in especially our blurb, it's blurbs a lot. Keywords are bad too, but that's a whole back end thing that readers don't care about. But like, the blurb is the description of the book. It's what obviously tells the reader, hey, this book is about this chick who does this stuff and a thing happens, whatever. And that is where typically people like to place content warnings. Independent authors like to place content warnings. But a lot of words that we might use will get us, some of them flat out get your book rejected. Amazon's like, we're not even publish this at all, period. Fuck you, go do something else. And
there are and
it happens a lot. I've seen a lot of releases get ruined.
Right. And there are some very, very well-known and respected authors out there who have had their books literally just booted off of Amazon.
So I can't say trigger warning or content warning like that, not those words, but what comes after. I can't say rape. I can't say non-consent. I can't say dubious consent. I can't say non-con or dub-con. It knows all those words. I can't say forced. I can't. This is an interesting one because I've seen this being like, and by the way, people who don't know better, who don't know all this is not written down anywhere. This is just stuff like authors have had to cobble together from sharing experiences. Nowhere does Amazon tell you can't use these specific words. Like we just all have to collectively guess and try to figure it out. One that was a big deal a couple of years ago was any form of the word breed, breeding, bred, and seeing like, you've got a book out called Bred, and it went right through. And I've seen some other books come out with breed in the title, and yet I would see simultaneously people's books getting rejected because they had that in the title or the word breed in the blurb, where there's a lot of alien romances where there's like forced breeding and shit going on.
Right.
like a lot of Omega verse, stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so it's like, I'm sure there's probably some other words. Oh, like I don't write this content, but I know I've heard people like stepbrother will get you kicked out in the blurb. Like there's all kinds of stuff. So it sucks. And for me personally, like if in a world where none of these problems existed, I would give content warnings and they would be very blatant. I would be like, this book is going to have, non-consent. It's going to have, graphic violence, whatever stuff, things that I know are, after spending time in the romance community, that I know are problematic for people, that certain people are going to be like, I don't want to read that. Get it away from me. I'm very pleased to tell people what's in there. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to foist upon them some stuff they don't want to read. But now it's like, now I'm going to tap dance. How do I tell them that's in there and still make my book available for the people who want to read it, to read it? So now I have to say things like in my very non-consensual, at least definitely at the beginning, pirate book, The Devil's Luck, I have to say things in the blurb like, pirates don't ask for permission, or he doesn't take no for an answer. Like, right. And you have to hope that the people reading the blurb are savvy enough to understand that that means this is probably a bodice ripper. Or heaven forbid, look at some reviews that definitely people just say what's going on, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now we got to tap dance. So it's like.
And that's the thing. That's, if there was any one thing I wish listeners or people, we could get people out there to understand, it's that it's not that we are intentionally not telling readers what's in this book. Because listen, just like you said, I would love to just be right up front and say, listen, this book has a rape scene in it. It has rape fantasy in it. It has dub-con or non-con or whatever. I would love to say that, but I can't.
Yeah, because then you can't put the book up for sale. And I realize that, and it's probably not our audience because they're probably listening to us because they read like maybe one of our books between the two of us. So probably not our audience listening here, but there's a lot of people that, believe, that shouldn't be for sale. None of that shouldn't be out there. Shouldn't be allowed. Right. So, but that's the point is, because we have all these varying definitions, even among people who call themselves dark romance readers, some people are like, well, I don't want to read non-consent, or somebody else is like, I'm okay with non-consent, but there better not be a miscarriage. Like the woman better not get pregnant and have a miscarriage. And it's like, all these are totally valid. You know what I mean? If you don't want to read that, of course, if that's going to mess you up, I don't want you to read it.
Right. And again, it's not that we're doing this,
I'm not like, ha, 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 let's see how I can fuck someone up.
Right. I'm not trying to, snidely whiplash, with a mustache.
I love that reference.
Yeah. Going,
I'll see you a snidely whiplash and raise you a dick dastardly.
Yeah. I sucked you in and forced you to read. It's not that. We would love to be 100% transparent, but guess what? The rules are stacked against us. We can't be, if we want to continue to sell books.
The best I can do is tell people in like social media posts, not things I pay for, because you can't pay for ads with stuff like that in either.
Right.
But like, when I post in my reader group or I post on my website, the description, because I can make that description whatever I want. Like that's the best I can do. But
exactly. And
unless I'm not going to sell on Amazon at all. And other sites are just as bad. iBooks is really bad. They might even be worse from what some of the stuff I hear.
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble had a big purge of erotica, especially dark stuff. Like a few years ago, when a Gallows poll was on there, it got purged with tens of thousands of other books.
Yep. I mean, it is the world we live in, unfortunately. So I guess that's my point is that we're not doing this because we're trying to be sly or trick people. This is the world that we as authors have to live in.
We're trying our best.
We're trying our best. So,
and this is the soapbox part I warned you about before we started recording, because I will say another thing. It isn't that Amazon as a corporate entity is or are prudes. So here's my little soapbox thing I'm going to get on for a second, because there was already, like, when I started publishing, there was already some stuff. There was some things like, don't put that in the blurb of your keywords. That'll be a problem for you. What have you? Don't have this on the cover. But since that time, it has gotten a lot more. It's clamped down a lot more. There's a lot more stuff that is a problem on your covers and your blurbs and your keywords. Like a lot more stuff you can't put. And the correlation that I am seeing, and I'm not the only one, lots of other people, individuals, and groups are seeing this, is that in 2018 in the United States, which is where Amazon is based, our Congress passed two connected bills, and they're the SESTA and FOSTA bills. And so one of them stands for Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, and the other one stands for Allow States and Victims to Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, which is a really long thing, but the acronyms are SESTA and FOSTA. And one of them was a Senate bill, one of them was a House bill, but they're connected basically. And for people that don't know, like a lot of authors of adult content are aware of this, but for people that don't know, basically prior to that, it was, I don't want to get into like all the, this code and that. You can go look up SESTA FOSTA Act and read about it yourself. Prior to that, basically what the rule was is that internet content providers were not responsible for third-party content, like as to whether that content was legal or allowed or what, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. So part of the SESTA FOSTA bill was that section of the original law that was from like the mid 90s got amended. And so now online services are not immune from liability anymore for that kind of stuff. So now they can get sued if whoever decides to sue them, be that the government or an individual or it's a class action, decides that they knowingly allowed or did nothing when their third-party users posted content that is participating in or encouraging or soliciting sex trafficking. So now, like on the surface, I don't think anybody wants anybody in real life to be sex trafficked. Nobody wants anybody to be sold as a human slave, any of that kind of shit. Okay. We might write some dark stuff, but nobody wants the bad things to happen in real life.
It's fantasy.
Right. So, but on the surface, they want to like do stuff to stop this going on online. So they want to make these websites liable for third-party content. So the thing is that the websites like Amazon have, the problem is there's no like distinct line in the sand. So because lawyers being lawyers, they've just cast a much wider net over what they're just going to be like, we're not allowing this. Anything that, so a lot of stuff is getting caught in the net of this. Like no one thinks that a book I wrote is secretly sex trafficking anyone. Okay. Like if they do, I don't know what to tell you. Like it's a fantasy book by like a nobody author out there. But like the wide net is gone to like cover almost anything that is like on the borderlines of sexual stuff or any certain types of sexuality. Even like a lot of LGBT content is getting caught in the net of things. Yep. And a lot of these sites are going, no, we're just not going to have it on there at all. And so, there's stuff people will probably remember in a practical sense. When this came out, Craigslist took off its whole personal section. Yeah. Like I was never on there, but I knew it existed. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There were other sites that had like, escort pages on them that was actually one of the ones that prompted this whole thing. But there are others, Facebook, remember Tumblr? Everybody lost their shit because Tumblr was like no adult content when they had been having pretty flagrant adult content for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
People will notice on Facebook right in front of you. I mean, forget sexual content. I've been seeing dumb stuff for like a picture of a shirtless man is getting kicked off. Like just crazy stuff is getting kicked off. People getting kicked off for just saying innocuous stuff. All of this is like under this umbrella of this wide net that the corporate lawyers are like, we got to make sure that there's no possible way that anyone could construe on any oblique level that we might be participating in sex trafficking, even though some of this stuff is like so in no way relate. Like it would be the craziest, like, reach to call any of that sex trafficking. But that is a lot of why the clamping down has seemed to have gotten worse in the last couple of years, is directly a result of this. And this is my soapbox, but it annoys me because quite frankly, the people it's supposed to protect, it's not even really doing that very well either, because now the people that are like legit sex workers that are just out there trying, I'm not nobody's slave. They're just out there trying to make a living. Now they got to go underground. They're hiding.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's a form of prohibition all over again.
Yeah, it's a whole weird thing. So I get very upset about this, and I feel like
because it has a direct impact on what we can do.
Well, and a lot of other stuff is getting affected that is so not related. Like if somebody is posting like a picture of their dick on Tumblr, like that's sex trafficking now. Like give me I don't know. It's like there's no discernment. There's just this huge brush, and everything is, pornography, and everything is sex trafficking, and it's very exhausting to me.
Yeah, and it's because of that. And what it's done is it's pushed all of that stuff to the fringes, which does create issues and problems that that the original bills, in theory, were never intended to do. But this is what happens when you bring lawyers and politicians into something like this.
Well, now you've created a black market.
Thank you. Exactly. Now you've created a new black market, and you've pushed things underground to where people have had to try to find ways, which is in a very weird sense. What we're doing is we're trying to find ways to circumvent it and not upset people, because we're not intentionally trying to upset people, but we don't have any choice. And so now you have people that then who don't understand come on and say things like we've seen recently. Like even just the other day, we had an author who wrote a book,
right,
and did her level best to let people know what the book was about. And some reader decided to use their bully pulpit of the review to say this author wrote this garbage book, or and they need to seek mental
help or whatever.
Yeah, mental health, or and it's just like, oh my God.
Right, and people are entitled to have whatever opinion they want of any content they want, and they're entitled to write that review. I think the frustration on our part is that
and I think
our content is out there for the people who want it. And I just really wish there was a better way to more clearly label what it is, so the people who really don't want it can just avoid it. Because I feel like not all that, there's a lot of people out there making other types of trouble, but I feel like most people, if they see some content they don't want, they just go, okay, fuck this, I'm going to the next thing. And they don't bother. I mean, there's some people that are going to agitate and you shouldn't be writing this at all, but that's a minority of people.
Yeah. And in this particular case and the other cases that we had seen and talked about prior to that, it was that the person said, it explicitly said, I wish they had said,
right,
as if this author had deliberately been obfuscated what the book was about. And it's like, no, she didn't. She had no choice. She couldn't say point blank what, in no uncertain terms what the story was about, or she would have been thrown in the erotic dungeon.
So we're not allowed at all.
We're not allowed.
And that's where it comes full circle to the vagueness of what does dark romance mean? Because even you and I had some things where we were like, oh, well, I think it means this could be included. And I'm like, well, I don't really think of that as dark.
Right.
So if I just label my book, if I say this is a dark book, that doesn't mean the same thing to everyone.
Right.
And so they might go into it thinking, oh, dark means it's an anti-hero and,
and all of a sudden
kind of grumpy. And I'm like, oh no, honey.
No, yeah. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, this isn't what I expected. We would love to be able to be 100% transparent and tell you exactly what you can expect in our book, but we can't.
Yeah. We're doing our best.
We're doing our best, but we can't do what I think some readers expect us to do, which is to be explicit,
right?
And to spell out for them exactly what they're getting into, because if we do that, we're cutting off our noses.
Yeah, and a lot of people go, well, just don't sell on Amazon, and it's like, I need you to be serious for a minute. That's
come on. Yeah,
if you don't sell on Amazon, I don't know where you're going to make a whole ass freaking out of.
Right, and you already pointed out that it's not just Amazon. So that argument doesn't work either, because it's not like
recently, because of Apple clamping down on a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. The app Discord, which a lot of folks use for gaming, but people use for other types of discussion forums. Like I have a Discord server, and on a Discord server, it's made up of individual channels. So those would be like the discussion topics in your forum, basically. And you can label a channel as not safe for work. And some of my channels are labeled that because we post adult pictures in there or talk about adult stuff. And so Apple has been like, well, first of all, Discord, which is, I think, getting acquired by Microsoft, which is a whole other thing, has recently been like, if you don't label your whole server as not safe for work, but we see that, enough of your channels are labeled as not safe for work, we're going to go ahead and label your whole server as not safe for work for you. Tough shit. And Apple has been like, if your server is not safe for work, it will not, you can't see it on our, on the app through iOS.
Yeah.
So it's like the stuff is getting more and more like, you can't say this here, this.
And again, it's because the lawyers are so risk adverse about somehow being drawn into lawsuits that may have zero to do with their client.
Right.
And
it's the job of lawyers to be risk averse. So I don't, I say this loosely. I don't necessarily blame them. Like I blame them a little bit, but I more blame stuff like legislation that is like on its surface designed to do something good. But when you dig into it, this is not solving the problem that you aimed at. And now it's creating other problems.
Right. And it's created black markets, so to speak, that are, are just exacerbating the problem that you're supposedly trying to solve. And it's just such a nightmare. It is the ongoing war against obscenity, pornography, or what people view as those things in this country. Like there's just, it's a stream of couple hundred years of all of that stuff. Of Puritanism that actually, we were there together because we were visiting and having a good time. And I went with you and your lovely wife. If anybody's ever in Las Vegas, there is the Erotica Museum. I don't know if that's the exact name of it, but it's something close. And they have a really cool display that is like this huge ass timeline of the history of, the battle against obscenity in the US. And it talks about all the different legislation and the different events that led to things happening. And it's really fascinating. So if you're there, that's a good place to go check out. Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's also kind of in a fascinating in a oh my god way. Like, I don't like it fascinating, but it's just it is. No, it is, because it is fascinating. It's just like as you go down it, you're just like, wow. You're like, good, all this effort to make sure that nobody sees a nipple. Yeah. Nobody sees anyone ever, suck a dick on camera. Like what? This is what we're so concerned with, not, war, not homeless people that need help, not healthcare. Like this is what we're worried about. It's a titty. This is the downfall of Western civilization. Right. Is a bared breast, a nipple. Right. Not so many other things that I won't go into right now, especially right now. Especially today, as a matter of fact. None of that matters. None of that is important. None of those things are being legislated, but God forbid we show the bare human body or talk about things involving human sexuality. Nope. Right. Because we've got an overarching morality that goes back a very long time that is still guiding a lot of decisions. So. Yep, exactly. So I'm not bitter. Yeah, exactly. Neither am I. As you can tell from this conversation we've been having about dark romance, and there's no part of this that I'm bitter at all about. I just feel like ultimately adults should be able to consume the content that is created by other adults, that everybody has agency who participated in making the content and who is participating in reading the content or consuming it in whatever way. Like, I feel like there needs to be a space for that. And I don't think that space needs to be a tiny, hidden, backdoor, shifty corner of the internet. I don't think it's that difficult to make spaces that, if you're that concerned, that young people don't have access to. Exactly. And, or you feel like you're in a prison where the guards are watching you. And so you have to have like this underground, network of, passing the notes around and the letting people know when the jailbreak is going to be, because that's essentially, what we end up having to do is like, okay, you talked about it. there's no set of rules or on Amazon or any of these other sites that tell you exactly what you can and can't do. It's only because we watched the guards long enough and discovered their patterns.
We know what gets you a beat down.
That we know what gets us beaten down. And then we shared it with all the other inmates. And that's
right, which, that's a little dramatic for me.
Sitting
at home in my pajamas. Like I'm here. But I get the metaphor. Like it makes sense. And the second half of that is like, as adults, this is just, again, my opinion. Like, we need to calm down with shaming other adults for things. Like, calm down. It doesn't affect you. It has nothing to do with you. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like
it's not
there's
going.
So much kink out there that I'm like, no, but like that's fine. The people that want to see it, go have a good time. Like,
have a great time. Enjoy it. If that's what you enjoy, God bless you. Go for it. It doesn't mean
bars. I don't like to get drunk. I don't like to drink. I don't go into bars. I don't,
Yeah, but you're not running around
to ban bars or tell other people they're pieces of shit for going in there. Like,
right. You're not running around like a 21st century Carrie Nation with an axe and a machine gun, shutting them down. We tried that once. It didn't work. Okay. That kind of thing just doesn't work in the long run. And yet here we are today. We're still going through it.
Yes.
So this is a good, why continue? Why, Eris? Why are you still doing this?
Well, I'm going to write the things I want to write. And, sometimes that does venture into these dark themes. It just does. I'm not going to sit here and try to like force myself to go, well, you can't write this. You can't. I'm going to write the stories I'm going to write. I'm going to try to label them as best as I can to, let people know what on a scale of 1 to horror show, how bad is this going to be in here?
So you're not going to give up. I'm
not going to give up. And the other reason I'm not going to give up is, despite whether it's Amazon clamping down or any other platform where stuff is at, and I regret that this book is not published right now because this would be a perfect promotional opportunity. As I say, and will say again in the actual rest of the books in the series, my series, The Vice Territories, the kind of motto of the Vice Territories is the vices always sell. That's what everybody kind of chants and stuff, not post-apocalyptic world. But the point is, you can try to squish all this stuff down as much as you want. It's always going to be there. The drinking, the gambling, the drugs, sex, whatever. It's always going to be there. So that's, I feel like even if it gets pushed out of Amazon, people are still going to want this content and they're still going to go find it somewhere. And wherever they are going to go find it, I'm sure all the authors that write it are going to be on the, we're going to have our pulse on the thumb of whatever that is. And we're just going to go there. So,
because if we were going to stop this, we should have done it a long time ago with this guy or entity that put out a book called The Bible.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, because let's face it. And I mean, I'm not trying to take credit for this. Like I just made this big discovery or anything.
But I have been allowed to write back then. I don't think so.
But you know what? Other authors have talked about this. The Bible is full of sex.
Yeah. It's full of all kinds of stuff.
It's full of
there's
murder,
violence, incest,
sex,
rape. Stop it.
Yes.
Everything that's in my book is probably in the Bible somewhere.
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point that authors far more famous than me have said, is that what we're writing right now is not anything new under the sun.
It is not.
It's nothing. It's been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you would think, because of the hoops that we have to jump through nowadays,
that this is new and it's just getting worse and crazy. Right. Meanwhile,
it's not. And meanwhile, I think it's sometimes like I should just go back to the Bible and just start stealing things, plagiarizing the Bible.
That's so bad. No, I have a question for you as we kind of are nearing the end of our very spicy podcast this edition.
What's that?
For what? So you don't have to give us any spoilers or even any names, but for your work in progress, would you consider that a dark book?
Oh my gosh, what I'm writing right now is definitely dark.
Is it dark? Was it spoilery to ask what qualifies it as dark, or you don't want to say it? That's fine if you don't want to say
no, because what has
content might be in there that you would say this is dark.
It has non-consensual sex in it. It has kidnapping, and it has forced themes. I mean, it's dark. In my opinion, it has everything that you would expect from a dark book.
Well, I had to say it because this is my genre. I'm excited to read what you're putting out. That was the thing I'm writing right now, which many people know is the Moral Coil. Is I would qualify it as dark. There's at a minimum, there's some off-camera non-consent for sure. Because to the surprise of no one in mythological canon, Medusa is raped by Poseidon. That's out there. It's not like
what? No. That stuff never happened in historical.
It does not happen on camera, but it's obviously central to the plot. But there's some other stuff that is definitely dub-con, and some people could say non-con depending on what your criteria are for that. Mm-hmm. And there's some very graphic. But I had at least a couple of my beta readers were like, is this as bad as it gets? Because I don't think I can take it if it gets any worse. It's it's almost too. I've never had anyone say that to me. I've never had anyone be like, this is almost too much. This is almost too much violence. It almost went too dark. So I'm like, no, this is the worst it gets. I promise. This is the worst scene. But so I know it's dark. There's violence and there's some questionable sex happening. So, which
is a one click for me. But right, then I you already knew that.
I'm mythology and problematic sex. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's go. I'm in. I'm all in. Well, yeah, I don't think either one of us is going to give up writing dark anytime soon. And I know there are so many other authors out there that are friends of ours and even people who aren't going to give up anytime soon. I think that in the final takeaway, we're going to do the best we can. We're going to follow the rules the way we need to continue to be able to share our stuff. But we're not going to change who we are, and we're not going to change what we write.
Yeah, I'm gonna write the stories that I want to tell, and some of them might be dark, some of them aren't, but it still gonna write them.
That's right. It is what it is, and we're not going to change just because of the situation that we find ourselves in, and we're not going to change for the people out there that think that somehow we have some other way to do things than what we're doing right now, because the fact is it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to change because people are judging me either.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that pretty much covered the topic that we wanted to discuss in this episode.
Yes,
don't you think?
It's a very angsty topic for me. I get riled up.
Well, and I think it's a topic for not only other authors out there like us writing in this genre, but for readers too that enjoy this, that I'm sure sometimes see those notes and stuff that they see online and in groups and stuff like that. And it probably makes them a little bit uncomfortable. It's like, oh, but I actually like this stuff. Why is this person behaving? And I know we've read the comments where, people have said, oh, don't listen to them. Don't let them get to you.
But I will say things are looking up, because a lot of times you'll see someone being like, oh, this is blah, blah, blah. Or they'll post a screenshot of a review that's, bashing some book like that. And then you'll see 50 comments of people like, what's the name of that book? I'm going to one click that right now. Yeah. So it's like a lot of people are becoming, they're like, no, I don't care if you are going to judge me if I like this. I'm reading what I want anyway.
Right. And that I love that, because that is so empowering. It's like, I'm not going to let these people beat me down or make me hide in the corner or pull the blanket over my head. I'm going to stand proud, and I'm going to let other people know that they have, other people that enjoy this too. And that aren't going to allow the one or two or however many people shame them into silence. And that
is self-doubt.
Right. And that is important, because it's empowering. It's important. It's empowering. And I love when we see that happen. Well, you can find the Not Safe for Work podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We are now on Pandora and on YouTube. And you can follow us on Facebook and also on Twitter at RomanceNSFW. That's at RomanceNSFW, one word. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Shane Starrett, or look for my group, The House of Starrett, on Facebook. You can also find me at my website, shanestarrett.com. Shane Starrett, again, all one word. All of my books can be found on Amazon, available for Kindle.
And we're laughing because of this whole episode.
Yeah, it is a big part of what we've been talking about. They're available for Kindle and in Kindle Unlimited and also in paperback.
All right, and I am also on Facebook. That's where I'm at most of the time of any social media place, by the way. You can follow my fan page or you can join my private group, Eris Adderley's Home for Wayward Troublemakers. I am on Twitter at Eris Adderley. I'm not on there a whole ton, but you might see me around a little bit. And you can find me on Instagram about the same amount. Almost all my books are on Kindle. I think actually all my books are on Kindle Unlimited, unless there's something weird I don't know about. And I will say that I have a free book if you sign up for my email. So if you like some menage action, like a male, female, that's bisexual people menage. To be clear, because some people don't like it when the swords touch. You can sign up for my email and you'll get a welcome email with a link to the free book. And erisadderley.com is my website. You can see that email sign up on there.
Thank you so much for having this discussion with me. You know, this has been one of our more important episodes, but it's also been not one that's been a lot of like, ha ha ha, funny. But I think it's important. I mean, this is what we write. You know, this is in fact, you know, the dark side, and that's where we are, and that's the kind of authors we are. And it just, you know, there's a part of me that wishes we didn't have to kind of like hide in the shadows or you know, tap on the cell wall, tap messages through the cell wall. But it is part of what we have to do what we love doing.
Right. And I also think it's a good thing to put it out there that, you know what, if you're listening and you like that kind of dark content, you are not alone. There's a whole bunch of other people just like you. And, you know, come find us
and be with us and
be with your people and don't be ashamed.
That's right. Be with your tribe. Thank you again.
All right.